Thank you. Hey, good evening, everyone. Welcome to One by One sessions hosted by the Gujarat chapter of Indian Society of Landscape Architects. Today, it's my pleasure to introduce Ms. Mayura Patil, who's a landscape architect based in Singapore. Mayura is an architect with a master's degree in landscape architecture from the National University of Singapore. She has 8 years of work experience in the industry, including as a landscape architect in an award-winning firm, Grant Associates, during which she worked on several projects in the APAC region. Later on, as a researcher at the National University of Singapore, she contributed to the ecological landscape designing research. Her passion for working on public projects and research skills have led her to her current role as a landscape architect at the National Parks Board in Singapore. She works on several projects ranging from strategic landscape planning to designing and developing public parks in Singapore. Her work aligns with building climate resilient city with tactical community involved. Mayura has received several academic awards, including the Gold Award for Best Design Showcase by the Singapore Institute of Landscape Architects. She has also been volunteering for various activities related to the profession and is currently a working council member at SILA. Apart from her professional work, Mayura takes pride in contributing and representing the community of landscape professionals via various platforms. It's a pleasure to have you here with us, Mayura. Thank you for joining us today. And we hope to learn a lot about Singapore's impeccable system, especially how landscape architects work with that. And we would really like to know a lot more about the National Parks Board and its function. So thank you. Over to you.
Thank you, Sandeepji. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you for the opportunity to be present in front of everyone. So without ado, let me start my presentation. Okay, so today's presentation is about what is the role of a landscape architect in Singapore. Although Sandeepji already covered about me, I would just like to say hello to everyone again. So I'm an architect from Academy of Architecture, proud alumni from that college, landscape architect from NUS, and I'm currently working with National Parks Board. It's a government body that takes care of everything that is related to nature in Singapore. And I'm currently working on landscape master plans, neighborhood parks, different community resilience projects, and also few landscape guidelines. Apart from that, as Sandeepji mentioned, I'm also a council member in Singapore Institute of Landscape Architects, which is similar to what we have in India, ISOLA. I'm also the APEC representative for student design competition for IFLA. And apart from that, I also assess projects for Landscape Excellence Assessment Framework, which is kind of a landscape architecture professional award, or it's kind of a scoring system that is set by government. So without further ado, I will jump in my presentation. So Singapore is also known as a little red dot, and it got its nickname. It's often used in media, especially in casual conversations, as a reference to Singapore, and it refers to how the nation is depicted on many maps of the world. If you see this red dot, that is Singapore. It can't even be completely shown on a world map. It's that small, and it's a state. It's a nation state, so it has its special limitations as per its size. Okay, so the size of area of Singapore is around 700 square meter. So if you compare that to Gujarat, it's more like Ahmedabad and Gandhinagar combined together. So this is just to give you an overview of what I'm talking about when I talk about the national scale landscape projects. So they are more meant for city, but at the same time, it's in a way easier to do because it's easy to rule out policies nationwide when the city when the nation is small enough like a city. So I will go from macro to micro. I will explain what are the role of landscape architects that goes beyond just designing aesthetically beautiful looking gardens and just these private estates. I would like to highlight again and again how government takes pride and plays a big role in formulating so many greening policies. And most of the development policies that go for the urban development for Singapore, they are always forefronted by the greening policies. So landscape architects play a way bigger role in the whole system beyond just designing private gardens or small scale design interventions. Singapore is quite proud for being a city immersed in greenery. If you see any photos of Singapore, you can Google and you'll see it's like always lush green everywhere. And with number of successful greening policies, the greenery in the city it started looking beyond aesthetics and just the recreational value of it. And despite being so small, the landscape policies focus on various scales, even from global to local. So I will explain how Singapore plays a role in global understanding of landscape policies. So I will start with global, then focus on national scale projects, then few regional scale projects that are executed, and how community plays a role in all these policies. Okay, so starting with the global policies or global projects that we can look into how Singapore plays a role in global scenario of a landscape architecture. So I will talk about two things. It's way beyond that, but I'm just shortlisting a few projects to talk about. So one is Singapore Index on Cities Biodiversity, which was led by National Parks Board. And the second one is international biodiversity conservation efforts. So despite of being such a small place, we can see how it plays a role in larger international biodiversity conservation. So going in the first one, what is the Singapore Index on Cities Biodiversity? So if you see existing environmental indices for cities, they focus more on brown issues such as clean water, sanitation, or energy efficiency, air quality, or waste management. But there was no index that would suggest how to calculate or how to quantitate what is the urban biodiversity in particular to a small local scale. So existing indices were not really addressing about a city. They were mostly talking about the nation-wide approach. So these current biodiversity indicators available are implemented at the national scale. And while there are numerous publications and studies done on urban biodiversity, there is not a single index that consolidates all these biodiversity related indicators at the local level. And this is especially very crucial for big nations such as India and as well as very small nations such as Singapore. So we can't really quantitate our biodiversity depending on the biodiversity of the whole nation. So that's where this index comes in role that was developed by Singapore. So what Singapore did is they took help of experts from various countries, and they also took help from this Convention on Biological Diversity, which is kind of a body that works together with many nations who are actively working on increasing urban biodiversity. So it's like a benchmark biodiversity conservation effort, and it's led by NPARC. So that is something that is to be highlighted and to be learned from. It's a self-assessment tool for cities benchmark and monitor the progress of their biodiversity conservation efforts against their own individual baselines. So it's not really a comparison between two different cities, but it's a comparison of the cities, its own existing biodiversity and how it has improved over the years. So it just has a baseline of its own and not with any other cities. That mainly talks about how every city is unique. They have their own problems. The governance has to deal with very unique problems for every different city. So this kind of baseline that is compared to their own existing baseline is quite helpful in that terms. And it's a quantitative score based system. So I'll just highlight what Singapore did. A few years ago, they got around 80 out of 100 in 2011. And the parameters are, I'll talk about the parameters in detail later. But the government realized what are the weak links in developing all these landscape policies. So, for example, they came to know that the ecosystem services of urban biodiversity was some topic that government could have worked more. So we can actually see in last 10 years, the government has come up with policies that focus on improving biodiversity, not only for the sake of it, or not only increasing the number of flora or fauna, but also to increase it to attain certain level of ecosystem services that are beneficial to the urban population. So what is this index is, it talks about two things. The first is it looks into the profile of the city. And the second is there are 23 different indicators, which are, so the scientists who are working on it have come up with these 23 very particular indicators. So the profile of the city talks about what is the indigenous ecosystem that is found in the city right now. And then what are the native species found in the city. So it highlights on the native species quite a lot, and the quantitative data on populations of key biodiversity indicators and some other biodiversity related data. And the second one is mostly based on native biodiversity, the ecosystem services provided by biodiversity. And the third one, and a very important one, is governance and management of biodiversity. So if you can see, we'll just quickly go through what are these parameters that this index talks about. And the highlighted indicators in blue is something I will show you a few projects that the government has already executed to improve their marks or improve their score in those particular areas. So it's a good checklist for the government when it comes to understanding where they are lacking, or what is their positive and what is the area that they can improve over the years. So that is one of the very good initiative that is helping many cities all over the world, that was led by Singapore. The second one, I would like to show you one project where you can see how Singapore is very actively trying to do something to participate in the global biodiversity conservation effort. So if you see where Singapore lies, it falls on East Asian Australasian flyway that stretches from all the way from Arctic through Russia, Alaska, and to Australia and New Zealand on the south. And it has around 22 countries on this path who are actively trying to conserve their wetlands and even improve the wetlands so that it helps these birds that are using this flyway. So there is one small wetland. It's called Sungai Buloh. It's a small part at the edge of Singapore's shores, and you can see that Singapore focused a lot on conserving that area as much as possible, and then developing it for the migratory water birds along this flyway. And this unique wetland flora and fauna and is home to more than even half the bird species that can be found in Singapore. It's quite popular in all the bird lovers. And recently, there are a few birds which are also traveling from further west. So there are few birds that were spotted who actually traveled all the way from Tibet and Himalayas as well. So it's quite unique if you see the size of Singapore, and if you see that tiny wetland reserve, it's quite remarkable that it was designed very consciously and it was conserved also very consciously, understanding its role in the global network. Yeah, and Singapore is located on equator, so there is a perpetual summer and rainfall. So it has very rich diversity of flora and fauna, and it's at the crossroads of east and west. So as I just explained, so it actually falls at a very crucial place when we talk about global biodiversity. And so there is an international partnership between governments of the countries that come under this bird flyway, and they aim to conserve migratory water birds and their habitats. And they also consider how it affects the people who are dependent on these habitats. So it's not only for the fauna, but also to the cultural aspect, or the people who are dependent on these wetlands. We'll zoom into that area. So how this Sungai Buloh Nature Park network looks like. So the first one is the nature reserve. So it's the reserved area, as you see in the dark green, that's the Sungai Buloh Nature Reserve. And this whole thing is designed by landscape architects with the help of ecologists, and we have marine experts, we have mangrove experts, and there are scientists. So it's like a big army of people who are experts in different sectors, and they come together. So it's not only it's not one way. It's quite complicated, and there are a lot of layers that go behind these master plans when it comes to uh, the government projects of this scale. So yeah, the first one is nature reserve, that is as highlighted in the dark green. The second one, if you see, these are more like buffers. So these buffers to the reserve are extensions to the east, west, and south, which are more like marshes. There are some mangroves and some mud flats. So these buffers actually protect the nature reserve and also help the nature reserve. And collectively, oh, okay, I'm missing one. So the third one is this dark green lines that you see. So these are along the roads, and they are kind of nature ways. They're designed particularly for creating ecological corridors that interconnects these buffer areas together. So collectively, these complementary wetland habitats strengthen the conservation of wetland biodiversity in this part of Singapore. And it also plays a very important role along the flyway, where the birds take a halt here before flying all the way to China after this. So there is a time period in the year where you can actually see the birds coming there. The migratory birds will come, and they will, yeah, it's a very pleasant sight to see in despite of being so urban. So it's similar to our flamingos. We don't really see flamingos here, but yeah, the feeling is quite great despite of being so heavily populated. There are a lot of migratory birds that take a stop here. So I will quickly run through this extension of the nature reserve just for you to see when it comes to designing. There is no heavy infrastructure as such that is put on it, but there is an active effort to create naturalistic looking habitats, which are they absolutely look natural. So if you visit, you won't be able to figure out what is the existing one and what is the man-made one. So they are designed so consciously and so sensitively that they perfectly blend in the existing mangroves. So there are different things like mud experience, or there are coastal boardwalks, then there are dragonfly pods or coastal trails and forest trails, different types of trails. And then there is also a small visitor center that also adds the educational value to the whole park. And yeah, a few areas where they are specially designed for the kids. So kids, it's a very popular area for kids as well. Okay, so this is another part of the extension is newly developed Kranji marshes. So as you see in the photo, it looks absolutely natural, but it's not really nature made. It's a man-made thing. So the design efforts that go behind that, it's quite. I feel it's quite appreciable that it's not very easy to design something that looks impeccably natural, and that has already started attracting quite a lot of migratory birds in this area. And there are few structures such as a vision tower, a tall tower for a bird watch, and there are some bird hides, and also some outdoor classes. So yeah, it tries to highlight that educational value quite a lot. Okay, then I'll zoom into some national level projects, that highlight few policies that actually came out from the landscape architects, and they are now part of a bigger master plan. They are more permanent master plan now. So few things I will talk about is just a quick overview of Singapore's urban vegetation. What is the greening vision that Singapore holds right now? And a few national scale landscape strategies that are seen to be quite successful, and they're very well appreciated by people. Okay, so a quick overview. Now, if you remember the size of Singapore, that 56% is a huge amount of vegetation cover that Singapore has out of its total land area. So considering its economical growth and the pressure on it as an island city, it's quite remarkable, and it's always increasing. And that 27% is actively managed. So that includes all the parks, gardens, or the rooftop greenery or lawns. 29% is spontaneous vegetation. So this spontaneous vegetation also includes of the secondary forest. So Singapore being a tropical place, it's very lush. It's very lushly diverse with flora and fauna. It always has water. They are quite fortunate with that. So the 29% of the land is covered with this secondary forest. Okay, and there is a very tiny 0.2% that is covered with primary forest. So primary forest, as most of you will know, is a forest that has never been disturbed. So yeah, Singapore is trying to protect it with all that it can. Okay, so the greening of Singapore is quite remarkable. So there are right now around 7 million trees already that you can see in the urban setting. There are more than 450 parks. So these are all government parks, public parks I'm talking about. And beyond that, there is a private greening that keeps happening as well. And then there are 4 nature reserves, and there are 1,600 community gardens. So this is also another initiative that is started by government. Government has encouraged people to take up this community gardening a lot, considering the limitation of so Singapore is very vertical. There are not many bungalows or not many land properties as such here, and you can't own a land. So Singapore understands that the older generation may miss this feeling of agriculture and having a backyard. So they actively give or lease places which are public land to the community for community gardens. And there is a long existing park connector network, which I will talk about in detail later on as well. So yeah, the greening efforts is quite remarkable in this tiny place. So how this whole greening started is by the founding Prime Minister, Lee Kuan Yew. If you may have read about him, quite a remarkable leader. This greening policies kick-started in, say, 1963. So if you see 1963, it's not very old. So the city is very young. And in this short time, the kind of level of greening they have achieved is quite remarkable. And considering the rapid urbanization and the pressure on this tiny land, the greening was always put on forefront of the development, and they are reaping the fruits of it, certainly, I would say. So how it started is in 1963, when it just kick-started, they had a vision of making it into like a garden city. So back then, I'm sure most of you would know what that garden city concept was. And in the mid 20th century, it was quite prominent to make a city into a garden city. And slowly, it was so successful, and it was so well appreciated by most of these investors, putting in service sector and building a whole service sector in Singapore, that it converted into city in gardens. So the city was secondary. The garden part of that whole city was put on forefront. So that idea of biophilic city came in picture, and more programs that would bring people closer to nature were put in. And recently, just this year, the government announced that it will be developed as a city in nature. So if you see the difference from garden to nature, it has become more mature. It has gone beyond just aesthetics of a garden, and it has gone towards biodiversity. So the wild animals as well as the other biodiversity will be put on forefront. So this will be even before people, or even before the urban development or the recreational value of green. So you can see it has really matured, and it takes, yeah, it takes some guts to say that such an urban, highly urban and economic place, we will still keep nature as a priority beyond its aesthetics and just the recreational value. So what comes under city in nature? Under this policy, we are developing few, so extending Singapore's natural capital. So understanding what is the existing green that is left and what it plays a role in a larger natural capital of the whole country. Then intensifying nature in gardens and parks. So currently it's, as you can see from the city in garden and the previous visions, all the parks were designed to be more aesthetically beautiful and more recreational. So now they will be more naturalized. And according to that, we will start intensifying the planting on it, or we'll start intensifying the way we design the park will completely change now. It will be more natural looking than it. So yeah, it won't look like a garden anymore. It will look more like a mini forest, as you can say. And restoring nature into the urban landscape. So this also includes streetscape, for example, the way we design the streetscape planting. It won't be just a row of trees as it used to be, but it will be looked at as this tiny green strips will be designed as forest corridors, and also strengthening connectivity within Singapore's green spaces. So that is also something I will talk about briefly later on. Okay, so on the same point of connecting the green, I will explain you this one of the initiative that turned out to be very successful, and it's now part of the whole urban design master plan. So what this Spark Connector network talks about is a matrix of green connectors weaving through urban spaces. It links Singapore's parks, gardens, and nature reserve. So it increases residents' accessibility to nature and greenery. And it's designed for cyclists as well as wheelchair users. So it's very easy for the whole family to just get down on this PCN. We call it a PCN Park Connector Network. And you can go to any garden or park or reserve in just 10 minutes. So the whole of Singapore is now trying to achieve this 10-minute walk theory. So no matter where you're staying, there will be a park that is accessible to you at the just a distance of 10 minutes walk. And yeah, so it's not just enough to intensify nature in isolated pockets. So we can't only talk about developing the parks, but for Singapore to be a healthy natural ecosystem, there are continuous efforts to strengthen the ecological connectivity between all the green spaces. And in tandem to city nature vision, NParks will also continue to expand this park connector network to ensure that more communities can access nature easily. And so yeah, just to tell you the number, in 2030, NParks is aiming to develop this network to about 160 kilometer. So 160 kilometer is a strikingly big number for a place like this. And yeah, so where we landscape architects come in play is these PCNs are not just any cycling path. So on a master planning scale, we have come up with these designs that will be relevant to that region. So it depends on the natural, cultural, historical, and recreational sites that these PCNs are linking together with the communities. So each of these loops, different loops all over the country, have their unique designs. So people don't find it very mundane, or it's not similar throughout the country. It's quite unique to each area. So another key thing that we design along with this PCN is how we can contribute in the ecological part of this design. So the planting that we do along the PCN or acts like eco corridors that connect the key habitats for all the fauna, especially the birds, not really mammals, but especially the birds. And fast growing native trees and shrubs are intentionally planted to attract native fauna. We focus quite a lot on native fauna. And this also encouraged to residents to appreciate nature at their doorstep. And this also fosters the environmental stewardship. And yeah, so this is mainly to connect people to nature in a more holistic way. And for the design of it, sufficient track width and other universal design standards are followed. That need not be said. And other supporting infrastructure such as lighting, toilets, shelters, dedicated bicycle crossings, and wayfinding signage are always there. Another thing to highlight when it comes to these national scale projects is interagency work. So interagency, so the government system in Singapore is a bit different than our system, but So for example, every ministry has a few uh, different government bodies under it which are specialized in certain things. So for example, where I work, National Parks Board, it takes care of nature, but then there are different government bodies specially dedicated for roads, and then dedicated for waterways. So when it comes to projects which are as big as this, we have to work very closely with uh, people from these different agencies, people who are in charge of water, road, the train system, and yeah, and so on. So two possible ways that we are targeting on is making these PCNs along roads and also along waterways. So waterways is especially like canals, where we have to leave some space as a drainage reserve, and that space is just wasted. So instead of just letting that space get wasted, we develop it into the cycling tracks, which could be used as park connectors. Okay, and the implementation part of it is also quite interesting to learn from. So before ruling out the whole strategy throughout the nation, there are always pilot projects that are executed on a smaller scale with multiple interagency discussions. And then we study the results of it, how people are reciprocating, and if there are any problems with the design. And after that only, that is included in the larger master plan. But this PCN particularly has been very popular. It's one of the most popular things that are started by government, that is highly appreciated by people. And the implementation of park to park recreational green links, it has become a mainstay in the master planning of the city. So it has become very permanent, and the master plan of the whole city that happens every 5 years has made this as a mandatory thing to look at. Okay, this another project, very interesting, which is it aligns with the PCN design strategy, but it's called as Round Island Route. So we are developing a cycling track that goes along the whole of the perimeter of Singapore. So yeah, I think it will be quite an exciting ride for the cycling enthusiasts, because it's a tiny place. They don't really have a very long stretch to really cycle for long time. So this will give them an opportunity of 150 kilometer of a continuous green cycling highway. And it will pass through diverse natural and urban landscape, including nature reserves, beach, wetlands, farmlands, residential, and then business parks, downtown districts, which are more youthful. So it will have different design features and overall a different experience throughout the whole track. Another very serious and very interesting work that we are doing is cooling Singapore. So Singaporean government takes climate climate change very seriously, and it's proactively working towards making Singapore climate resilient. And that is another place where landscape architects play a very crucial role in. So, to in the efforts of making Singapore a more climate resilient city, there is this one of the research projects that are going with the help of government in one of the universities is cooling Singapore. So they have come up with the data of how Singapore's heat island effect is going to change over the years. So NParks, National Parks Board, has come up with this initiative of planting more than 1 million trees in next 10 years. And that will help cool the city. It will reduce the temperatures. Need not say it's a very, it seems to be like a very simple solution. But when it comes to planting 1 million trees in a already very restricted area, it's a big task that the government officials are doing right now. So what it will do is it will cool the city with multi-tiered forest like planting along streets or even in the park. So the trees are not only randomly picked, they are studied how they grow in a forest habitat, and they are planted according to that, the way they will grow in their natural habitat. And even the species are picked up that will help reduce the temperature over the years. And then naturalization of parks is also another thing that will impact positively in cooling Singapore over the years. And also the streetscape planting, skyrise greenery. So skyrise greenery is basically the vertical greenery, and greening industrial estates. So industrial estates are often places where we don't really think about putting landscapes there, but uh, NParks has started looking into these industrial estate not only for making the workers who are working there to have a pleasant atmosphere to work in, but it will also drastically reduce temperatures over the year, because these industrial areas are the areas that are most gray, and the temperatures are seen to be highest in these areas. So yeah, those are a few of the things that Singapore is doing actively towards climate change. Okay, so what are these nature ways? That is another a very interesting thing that Singapore is doing. So this is in relation to PCN, but at the same time, it focuses more towards cooling Singapore and also increasing the biodiversity. So these are the road verges along roads that are designed with specific trees and shrubs to facilitate the movement of birds and butterflies between two habitats. And this is to create small urban habitats in urban context. So this will not only increase the urban biodiversity, but also reduce temperature and also aesthetically improve the streetscape. So it has also shown to be quite successful among community. So for example, there is one community, they came up with a app on their own that is helps them just record what are birds they are spotting on these nature way near their houses. So it's quite nice to see how people have started connecting to nature just because of these some of these master planning strategies. And by 2019 there were around 130 kilometer of nature ways, and by 2030 NParks aims to make it to around 300 kilometer. So these nature ways are not randomly put anywhere, but they are studied by our scientists in detail, which are the habitats that we would like to connect, and they only focus on those links. Okay, so this is a quick overview of how these nature ways are designed. So the first one is the emergent layer. So as you can see, it really replicates how we see a tropical forest habitat in real. So the emergent layer is followed by the canopy layer and the understory layer with the shorter trees. And the bottommost is the shrub layer, or with the ground covers that will attract more insects like butterflies. So altogether, it forms a very interesting naturalistic habitat. And again, I would like to highlight these are tiny strips along the roads, so it's not like a big park. These are very constrained places where we have to deal with the services and the pressure on um, all the other things like drains, and then we have to fit in and squeeze in all these interesting ideas with whatever land is available. Okay, going to the third one, regional. So I will quickly go through few of the parks that I feel are quite interesting for, and I think you guys will like having a look at it. Most of you must have heard of these parks, so I have just categorized a few. So first one is under heritage and botanical. The second one talks about cultural design, and the third one climate resilient, which are they focus on flood resiliency. So moving on to the first one is the Singapore Botanical Garden. It's one of the most famous park that we have in Singapore. It also has achieved UNESCO heritage status, one of the very few parks that has UNESCO heritage status. It's around 80 hectares. And so these are all parks that are run by government. So these are all public parks. And you can see how Singapore keeps trying to reactivate even if the park is very old. They keep coming up with new programs or new interventions that will keep attracting people to that place again and again. And this is particularly we can see during the COVID time. Since last year, the visitorship to all the parks have increased so much that all of us, all the people who are not really trained to be on front line, we are still deployed on site, including our CEO. We have to be on site, making sure all our parks are safe for use and safe for all the people to use, and they can still come and do their physical activities with safe distancing. So yeah, the parks have become very famous, especially in this COVID times. There are fewer people in the malls, but more people in the parks. So yeah, coming back to the botanical gardens, a few of the interesting things like National Orchid Garden. It is newly renovated with a new orchidatum and cool house with the mist garden. Then Evolution Garden or this Ethnobotany Garden, where they display plants that were used traditionally by indigenous communities of the region. And yeah, some new arboretum or this learning forest, which add a big educational value to the schools. And these other things that are highlighted in dark gray, as you see, they are the parts in the park which are designed based on different species collection. So yeah, they're particularly designed to display what a great collection this botanic garden has. Okay, I'll just quickly go through a few photos of some of these features in the park to give you an overlook. So this is Learning Forest. Then this is the newly opened National Orchid Garden, quite has already gained popularity among people. And mind you, this is again a public project. It's a public park. So the fee to go there, it's very minimal, just to maintain it nicely. And then there's a new one, and then this ginger garden, which is one of those parks that showcase all the ginger species that are collected in the garden. So their design, again, you can see the design is more naturalistic. It doesn't really look like a very manicured French garden. It looks like a tropical garden, to be very honest. Okay, another park, Fort Canning Park. Again, this is just opened a couple of years ago. It's based in a heritage site. So it was like a tiny fort. I won't really compare it to our forts in Rajasthan, but a tiny fort that was conserved. And there was not really any landscape value as such to that whole precinct. So the landscape architects have come up with a master plan to revive it, and all the activities or all the design features that were proposed are very sensitively designed, with a lot of research that went in understanding what was the history of this park, and especially the natural history of Singapore and how to connect people back to that natural history of Singapore. So yeah, I will just show you a few photos of how a cultural park was designed with these mural walls that were made in Indonesia and yeah, installed here. And even the street was retrofitted with some of the species that were used in traditional culinary of Singapore. So you can see the design is quite modern, quite urban, but yet the plant species that were selected are they take inspiration from the historical importance. This garden particularly, as you see this wooden frame, it's quite interesting that there was this historian who collected and who drew paintings of tropical forests. So these frames kind of tried to depict that natural landscape that was what he drew, and they have tried to create these minimalistic shrunk landscape scenarios that he had drawn. And the spice garden, spices play a big role in Asian culinary, as we all know. And even the playground is designed with naturalistic play elements to blend in with the whole cultural aspect of the master plan. And yeah, a replication of a first botanic garden that was there. So these are few of the cultural design aspects. Then yeah, so this is another park that was designed for climate resiliency based on flood resiliency. So it's called Jurong Lake Gardens. It is developed along the giant lake in the middle of quite a developed city. So it has few design features like water play or the cleansing biotope. So this water play is actually designed with the cleansing biotope, where the water that is coming from the whole park, that is the rainwater runoff, that gets cleaned in this cleansing biotope with the help of plants, without any mechanical intervention. And this clean water is then diverted to the water play. So Singapore is quite particular about the quality of the water, especially when it comes to kids touching it. So the amount of design technicalities that went in designing this cleansing biotope is uh, quite yeah, it's quite nice that there was a lot of detailing that went in making sure the water quality is of that standard where it could be touched by kids and people with no harm. Then yeah, there are a few freshwater swamps that are recreated. So initially this park was more like a big lawn and just with few big trees. But now if you see, it is more lush, and the freshwater swamps that are created look absolutely natural. And also few grasslands that are recreated again have become very popular among people. So I'll just show you some exciting photos of this park. So few water sports things. So this is the water play that I was talking about. It looks like a natural beach and a natural tidal water play area. The kids love it. This freshwater swamp walk is also something that has become very famous among people. And this another freshwater swamp that looks absolutely natural, again man-made. And there are these islands that attract birds, and it's full of bioswales. You won't really see any concrete drain here. All the drains are bioswales, from smaller scale to really big scale. But the whole of the draining system of this park is purely naturalized. So all the drains are naturalized drains. Okay, and the last project that I would like to talk about on a national scale is Bishanang Mukhya Park. Again, I'm sure most of you must have read about it. It's a very, very famous park, one of its kind, especially in Asia. And when we talk about one of a kind, I would like to highlight that Singapore doesn't really have big precedent as such when we talk about a tropical country. So, in many times when a project like this, where you're naturalizing a drain and converting into a river in a tropical place with that level of groundwater table and the kind of urban pressure that we have and the limitation of space, and if you don't have any previous study to learn from, it's quite risky. It needs a lot of design technical details, and it needs to, yeah, it needs a lot of confidence as well to execute that. And the government is quite proactive, as well as they respect these landscape designs very much. They give the landscape architects to try out these new ideas, and they're always improving from what they learn from every project here. So this Bishan Angmokya Park was a concrete drain with just a normal park, but then it was proposed to be converted into a naturalized river. And so this naturalized river also has a few ponds and then cleansing biotopes. So it not only cleans the water that is led to the reservoir. So again, okay, so a larger picture of why Singapore is very keen on cleaning the water is we have very limited resources in terms of, especially about drinking water. So a part of the drinking water comes from Malaysia, and a part of it comes from Singapore's own reservoirs. So when all the water that is run off from this urban areas on the from the gray surface, it goes all the way to the reservoirs, and in the reservoirs again it has to be cleaned before it gets back to people. So when we have greening, or all our parks, when they play a role in cleaning the water, it helps the larger water conservation, as well as the level of clean water that we get because of naturalizing these drains is quite remarkable. So yeah, it's not only aesthetical, again, it plays a very large role in what we design. So this Bishanang Mukyo Park has some cleansing biotopes. of a very huge size, I would say. So it's like a series of specially engineered wetlands that treat river and pond water with natural looking environment with the help of plants. And then even the water playground is designed with the theme of uh, understanding how river work, and the landscape pond, as well as the recycle hill. So when this whole park was getting built, there was a lot of excavation that happened, and the designers have also come up with a nice way of recycling this giant amount of soil that was excavated into a recycle hill, and that has a beautiful sculpture that also adds like a vantage point to view the whole park. So yeah, when we talk about sustainability, these kind of things are like good learning points for all the designers in futures to understand how it goes. I would also like to highlight how Bishan Park is maintained. So for it to look natural, there were very special and very specific maintenance guidelines that were designed by the landscape architects so that it doesn't look manicured. So we want it to perform like a natural river. And again, because it is in tropical area, it can't be left without any maintenance, because the plants grow so fast, and there are so many invasive species that we can't really let it grow as the nature would take. So we have to control it, but control it just enough so that it plays its technical role in cleaning the water, and at the same time it gives that naturalistic feel to the whole design. Okay, so we'll see a few photos of how it looks. So how it was before, you can see a giant concrete canal, and after how it has become a naturalized river. And this whole area where you see the lawn, it's not just a lawn, it's actually a river plain. So when it floods, when it rains very heavily, which does quite often in Singapore, the whole park is underwater. So it is designed to take that flooding. It's designed to get submerged in water for a certain amount of time. So only the key infrastructure such as the bridge or the pathways are above the water level, and everything else, including some of these benches and low key stepping stones and other plants, they actually withstand the whole flooding for a certain amount of time. Okay, again, it's very popular amongst kids especially. And yeah, few of the features like this cleansing biotope that I was talking, it's a very well designed with the help of engineers, of course. And yeah, it's a functioning biotope. Then the water playground, and this is a recycle hill that has a very famous sculpture that is one of the attractive point in the whole park. So yeah, these are the regional level projects. Then the last one I would like to highlight on how community plays a role in this whole thing. So this is the most micro we can go to. So I will talk about two things: community engagement and about community gardens. So Singapore doesn't really only talk about master planning from a research point of view, but when it comes to executing projects, communities' opinion is taken very seriously. And yeah, there are many projects that go purely top up. So we designers come very late in the picture. So we like to hear about what the community wants to change in their area. So I'll just give you an example of a recent project that I was working with. So it's called creating community resiliency, and we are trying to um, educate the community about climate resiliency and what is climate change, and at the same time making them understand how it plays a role when we design any park. What are we talking about climate change? I mean, how it is going to help making Singapore a climate resilient place. So that's why this project was taken for community engagement, to make them understand when we propose something in their neighborhood, they should understand the reasoning behind it. So it's a very quite an interesting project. So we had a number of public exhibitions and public engagements where the people who live in that area will come down and then let us know what they would like to see in their community, and also their understanding of climate change. So most of them are quite well aware of climate change. They accept that they need to do something about it, and they're quite appreciative about the government, whatever policies and whatever initiatives that we have come up with. So this number 3 is an exciting thing. So during COVID, most of our projects were on halt. So unfortunately, most of our landscape workers come from India and Bangladesh. And during this COVID time last year, most of them, most of them fell sick because they all stay together in dormitory. So our projects were almost on hold for a very long time. So how we utilize that time till our workers are back on ground, all healthy again, we arranged a lot of these community engagements over Zoom and over other platforms where we could interact with the community. So we would actually take sessions to just teach them how to use this technology. Most of the senior citizens would not even know how to use the technology. Rather, even we were learning newly how to use it, but we would learn it and then we would teach them, and then we started getting in conversation with them. We utilized that time period of not having any project on ground with more of these online community engagements, as well as most of our research initiatives or this master planning level work that happens mostly on paper first than on ground is something that we did throughout the year when we were not really executing any projects with that pace because of COVID. So yeah, you can see this picture. As soon as things were little okay, when people were coming out, we had this community session on ground where people, so I only helped them in designing a bit, but most of it came from them. I would only help them if they're stuck somewhere and if they are really overwhelmed with the designing process, and especially about selecting the plants. They are not really well aware of plant species, but they knew how they would like it to look aesthetically. So I would sneak in my biodiversity agenda, and then I would just help them select species that they would think are looking aesthetically well. So the last step was them coming on ground, making sure everyone is masked up and with the safe distancing and all the care that we could take. But so we started executing this tiny patch. So it is more like a tactical project. You must have read about this tactical urbanism, which is picking up quite a lot of popularity in many countries, even in India. So it was like a tactical project where they executed few ideas about climate resilient park, and from this we would again take another community engagement sessions about what did they learn from this tactical project and what they would like to what they would like to see in a bigger park. So after this tiny prototype, we would have a bigger park that will serve a larger community in future. So how this community is involved in different projects is either they are involved in designing a process or the construction. So as you can see, most of them are on ground, constructing, really getting their hands dirty. Landscaping, some of them are, they're experts in gardening. So we get them to plant few things and then come and be more actively involved in this landscaping process. And many of them are very keen on arranging programs on the site. After that whole park or after the whole project is executed, they would like to be involved in keeping it running or making people keep coming back to this uh, park, or just keeping the whole operations going on. And some of them are quite they take the stewardship, they take the ownership of that whole park, and they also make sure that it is maintained well. Sorry. So if you see, if there are more than 450 parks in the whole country, and the manpower is it's still limited, so this community stewardship really plays a role in when they come in and they start maintaining the park, not physically, but at least in terms of just keeping an eye on how people are using these parks. So you'll always find these parks are pretty clean. People always follow the rules because they're very attached to it. And especially if they have executed a part of it, they will look at it like they would look at their home garden. So yeah, for the community involvement, there are different communities as well as schools, organizations, individuals, and this expands the outreach and engagement of programs yeah, for NParks as well. And yeah, as I said, it promotes greater community stewardship in the management of our green spaces on a larger scale. Okay, the few other things, last few projects I would like to talk about is very interesting thing that NParks has started is called allotment gardens. So as I said, many of the senior citizens, they saw the urbanization happening in Singapore very fast. So they used to have these beautiful village houses with their own tiny farms and access to land and access to gardening on land. And then Singapore became urban very, very fast in just 30 years. They, most of them lost touch with land. So NParks has come up with these idea of allotment gardens. So these big allotment gardens, raised planter beds, they are about 2.5 meter to 1 meter, and they are leased to the people who are interested. So you can pay rent to government to use this, and you can actually plant anything that you like, and you can maintain it the way you like. Most of them put edible plants, and then they either yeah share it with the community, or yeah, it's a very popular thing among senior citizens, where they can just come down and get their hands dirty. And then there are other things like community gardens. It's like a platform for community bonding while gardening. So a group of people from a same community living nearby, they come together, they approach the government, and then we will let them use a piece of land for them to explore, them to design, and them to maintain and use it. We have few experts, few landscape designers who are expert in this. They will go on ground and they will guide them about designing and maintaining it, making sure there are, for example, being in a tropical place, we are quite worried about malaria, dengue with the mosquito growth. So they explain them about how to keep it maintained in a clean environment. So these are community gardens. And the another thing, another program which is quite popular is called Community in Bloom. It's a collaborative partnership with public and private sector, and there are volunteer groups that promote gardening among residents. So there are a lot of these competitions, and NParks is always providing them videos online and a lot of guidance that is given to them one-on-one as well. So yeah, just to excite everyone and keep them in touch with the gardening, there are these awards and competitions that keep happening every year. Now because of COVID, we could not even do that. That used to be one of the biggest thing in these gardening groups, but NParks made sure they will conduct many exciting things over online platforms. So yeah, we keep doing what we can even in this situation where we can't really go on ground and interact with them, or achieve these garden festivals, or yeah, these exhibitions. So it's always good how people are changing this engagement with the community. It's getting online now, everyone is using different platforms to still be connected. And yeah, just that's about it. But a few more interesting projects that I could not cover really with the time limitation. The skyrise greenery is also again very much encouraged by Singapore government. There is you can the developers can also get awards, and that can increase their PR. So we have plenty of awards that will encourage the developers and the architects to design buildings with greenery. So for example, if you see this Kampung Admiralty newly opened thing a few years back, it's literally a mini forest that is growing on a building. So the building is almost not there if you see it, yeah, the way it is designed. So yeah, all the designs are going towards naturalized landscape and not really a manicured, aesthetically beautiful landscape. So yeah, it's going towards ecological aesthetics. And then Gardens by the Bay, as you all must have read and heard about, is one project that I cannot not talk about if I'm talking about landscape in Singapore. So yeah, it has changed the way we look at landscape, and this particular project has especially brought so much of economical value apart from the aesthetical value that yeah, it just shows what landscape architects can do, and if given a chance with that scale, what could be achieved beyond just gardens. And yeah, another interesting project that Singapore flaunts is EcoLink Bridge that connects to fragmented forest, and it runs over a very busy highway. It has shown to be successful. It has connected these two forests where you can see a lot of mammals, especially crossing the forest patch without getting hit by cars. So yeah, that just shows how sensitive the government is when they realize that there was a mistake of putting a road between these two forests. There was proactively there was a project that came up that will patch up few things, and you learn from your mistakes as well. So yeah, that's about it from my side. I hope it was not too lengthy for everyone.
Thank you. I think it was pretty elaborate and enlightening for most of us. So yeah, there are a few questions, and with the time limit, I'll try to combine them and ask you in larger packets. So one
Okay.
of the series of questions is related to the larger policy and how it comes up. So I think to answer this question, first I would like to ask you if you can describe the composition of the team at NParks. So is it just landscape architects, or is it like multidisciplinary, or how does it work?
Okay, so just to give an example, the way we have PWD, NParks used to be PWD a few years ago. And then once the greening policy started picking up its importance, it became a government organization on its own. It falls under Ministry of National Development. And under NParks, it's a multidisciplinary team of around 500 staff. So there are people who are expert in, for example, wildlife and wildlife management, people who are expert in community engagements and community forefront work. And then there are landscape architects. So for example, I come in the design division. So, and even just like design division, there are a huge team of park managers. So people who are on ground making sure the parks are active and functioning. Then there is a big team of form of researchers. So they are purely the ecologist researchers. And there is a planning team, and yeah, there are a lot of other teams, and we always work together for every project.
Okay, thank you. And the second part of this question would be, how does this team at NParks also communicate with the other teams? So for example, you have URA, you have the National Planning Authority, and so on and so on. So what is the kind of interaction that happens at the policy and planning?
Yes, so that is one very important and interesting question. So initially, it got quite complicated and difficult understanding the scale of the projects, and with so many agencies having becoming the stakeholders. So the government, the Prime Minister office came up with this new initiative called as One Singapore, where all the agencies are encouraged to work together. So for every project now we work more closely together. So it is quite open, and they all fall under one umbrella of Ministry of National Development. So yeah, for every project, whichever agency is involved, we work all together.
Okay, right. Thank you. Now to come to the third part of the question, which is, I think Chetan has asked this, and I think what his question is, what do you think is replicable in the Indian scenario that could help the overall status of, greening, climate resilience, whatever you may call one of these policies to be more applicable and in that sense, more actionable?
I think one of the key things that could be replicated easily is the community engagements. I feel if there is a more community involvement directly, the once the community is educated about climate change and how landscape architecture plays a role in that, then the government also will understand the role of landscape architects. It goes just beyond designing a few gardens. It's very crucial, and we are also trained, especially in our masters, and we are trained, we are equipped to deal with more serious problems than just that. So I think that is one of the things, if we go from down, may change few things quicker.
Absolutely, it seems to be an interesting option. So, a question related to that, then, that is there, that are all public projects part of public consultation in Singapore, and how does it work?
Yeah, so till now, not all the projects were part of public consultation, but now there are selected projects. So because it's a new thing, a few projects are part of public consultation, and yeah, we are coming up with a more permanent and more stable framework that will help us communicate with the communities and get maximum benefit out of the discussions. So slowly we are reaching there. A few parks are selected for these community engagements.
Absolutely. And there's another tangential question that relates to one of the last slides that you showed about greening on buildings. So this vertical greening approach, is there some sort of benefit either in terms of floor area or something that the developers get, or anything else that they get for increasing the amount of greening on their buildings, or is this a mandatory provision that they have to?
Yeah, it's not a mandatory provision, but this is an additional thing. So this is despite of providing the amount of green that has to be provided. So the green roof, the horizontal greening could be considered in the greening area when we talk about the greenery and development policies. But the vertical greening and the other skyrise greenery is more of getting additional benefits. So the developers get a lot of initiative, a lot of these incentives from government in terms of there are different awards and yeah, different scoring system where they can really prove this to be beneficial. Yeah.
So to continue that question, there's another question that says, does the policy level intervention have some sort of guidelines for what kind of landscape should these private developers develop, so that there is some sort of continuum or a cohesion overall?
Yes, certainly. So NParks has this Greenery and Development Provision Act that talks about all the guidelines that all the developers need to follow. They have to follow in order to get certification to go ahead with the development. So before the development construction starts, they have to get it cleared with the government agency about the greening provision. So that talks about the area that they have to provide, as well as the buffers around the buildings that they have to provide. And now we are working more towards making it more naturalized. So we are working on guidelines and policies where we will force the developers to make this greening look more natural. So yeah, that is underway as well.
So there is another sort of question on the maintenance of this scale of landscaping, which I think you're addressed in one part, but if you could slightly elaborate on how does the maintenance of such a large and extensive park system, part of which is completely naturalized, artificial. I mean, it's got a wide variance. So could you give us some insight into that?
Absolutely. Very interesting question and very important question. So even as landscape architects, we work with the managers closely so that we understand that whatever we are drawing on paper, when these people are going to manage on ground, the difficulties that they face should be minimized as much as possible. So there is a big team that is dedicated for the park managers. There are officers on ground who take care of the greening, and yeah, there are managers who look into the administrative side of the management. And nowadays, with the limited manpower, you can say, as well as Singapore doesn't have the blue collar jobs which are coming from the Singaporeans, so most of them are foreigners, so they are trying to reduce the pressure on foreign worker quota. So we are quite into digitalization of maintenance now. So there are nowadays we have these cool robots that will go and just cut the grass on the lawn, and then there is a big the way technology is used in maintaining the parks is quite interesting as well. There is every tree in every park is chipped, so it has a GIS tag. So all the managers have to put in the data about when was the tree assessed, making sure that it is safe. And considering it's a tropical area with a lot of storms and heavy winds, we have to make sure the trees are safe. So even for that, we use technology very heavily, including GIS.
Absolutely, that I think would be an interesting case study in itself.
Yes.
So there's another set of questions which relates to a different topic that you talk about, especially about climate resilient designing. So one of the questions is, how do you balance the idea of climate resilience in your design versus the end user? And a related question to that, if you may like to answer, is somebody is asking if the Bishan AMK Park, does the runoff sort of include only that catchment, or does it include a larger area? I would say that these are related.
Okay, so the first thing about this climate resiliency and designing the parks for climate resilience, it's certainly not easy, especially when you're designing with water. And so you can see many projects in, for example, in Netherlands, which are designed to be, they could be flooded, these floodable parks that you call it. But when it comes to a tropical scenario, it is not the same. So we have to come up with our own modeling and understanding the whole data from a technical point of view before we start designing. So there are number of research groups that are only focusing on how this natural capital of Singapore will play a role in climate resiliency. And once that data is churned and understood and all the analysis is done, only then we start designing. And how community plays a role is so that is our job. When we go for community engagements, we first have number of sessions just for them to understand what are we talking about when we talk about trees reducing temperature. I mean, it sounds very simple from a book point of view, but when we design it, understanding the location and the kind of species that we select is something that we many a times you have to do it without even expecting that everyone will understand everything that goes behind designing these parks. As long as they're getting the benefit of it, yeah, we should be just fulfilled and satisfied with that. And coming back to the Bishan Ang Mo Kio Park, the catchment, the source of the water, it comes from a reservoir. So that connects the reservoir all the way to the river that goes to the sea. And before it goes to the sea, again, it is captured at Marina Barrage. And then there is a whole system. And Bishan Ang Mo Kio Park is like one of the tiny part in that whole system. So yeah, it takes a catchment of a certain neighborhood only around it. It's not for a humongous site, but only the site that was already catering the natural topography and the previous canal that was catering to it only takes in it only talks about that catchment.
Absolutely. That's quite an interesting thing to overall sort of mull about, especially for the Indian scenario and how we start looking at it. So this is another tangential question that somebody's intrigued about. What is the sort of web of faunal diversity that is there in Singapore? So what would be the apex predator, for example? What are the mammals available?
Okay, it's a very interesting thing. So yeah, the name Singapura comes from lion, Singa, but there are no lions here. The last tiger was shot, I think, around 50, 60 years ago. So there are no tigers, no lions. The predators, the mammals are very limited to say wild boars and some civet cats, and there are some native Southeast Asian species such as the flying lemur. So there are a few mammals, especially the nocturnal mammals, and a lot of snakes. The fauna variety is quite it's quite interesting to see on this tiny island how many birds are found, and the insect especially is also quite good as well. But yeah, beyond that, the predators are quite limited.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So there's another interesting question for you, which says that, what kind of methodology or strategy do you follow for this whole process that you talked about in the past, which I would term as naturalization, where you're saying that from just being an aesthetic or ornamental idea, you are now sort of creating a biodiverse habitat within the parks itself. So is there any strategic sort of ideation that is going into?
Right. So the City in Nature vision was just revealed this year. So the team of landscape architects are still working on creating the framework that will help the landscape designers to naturalize the parks. So we are currently working on how, from a landscape architect's point of view, from a designer's point of view, how we can naturalize the parks. Also, the managers are putting in their experience in when we will start naturalizing, how we will manage it, and what all other constraints that we will face. And another key team that is playing a role is wildlife managers. So they are the people who who address the issue of wild and wildlife and people's conflict. So for example, there are wild boars who leave the forest habitat and start coming in the playgrounds. So that is where they come in play as well. So there is a the framework that is getting developed considering all these opinions, especially how we can use the technology, how we can take help of GIS, and all these layers are getting combined right now to form a one framework that when we come up with a tender for private consultants, they have to go through that framework to make sure that the park is designed in certain way to call it a naturalized park.
So another interesting question based on what you just said. So some of these greenways that encircle the entire country, how does one ensure that there is no wildlife conflict? Because a lot of wildlife that you mentioned is actually very shy and in that sense, they're very wary of people.
Yes. So one of the most important thing when it comes to the wildlife conflict is educating people. So there are a lot of programs right from schools. There are a lot of community outreach that goes on behind making people understand what is this wildlife, and it is going to be part of the country once we start naturalizing. And there are bigger benefits such as schooling the whole nation when we talk about naturalizing. So once they understand the weightage that the benefits are giving, they change the whole attitude. And then again, the team from wildlife managers, they are working very closely on. We have very prominent scientists who work on that team, by the way. So they are coming up with strategies to understanding and redesign the existing forest habitat so that the predators, not the predators, but the big mammals or the snakes will not, they will not have to leave that habitat. So they're basically leaving that habitat, either they're looking for food, or either they're looking for mating, and that whole forest is not enough for them. So that means something is going wrong in the design of the forest, or we are disturbing the ecosystem. So these scientists are looking into that as well, what we as landscape designers could help in making sure they are happy, all the wild animals are happy where they are.
Absolutely. I think that's very interesting to understand that everything in Singapore sort of starts from the bottoms up approach rather than a top down initiative approach.
Mhm.
So before we sort of close within the timeline, I just have one last re-question for you, because there were a lot of questions that really said that how would you compare Indian policies vis-a-vis the Singaporean policy? And of course, it's not an apple to apple comparison, but if you have any closing words that you would like to talk about at the policy level.
Okay, certainly it cannot be compared because the scale of and that's why I started the whole presentation by showing you the scale comparing to our cities. It's a very different ball game altogether when it comes to comparing Singapore's policies to any of the Indian policies. But you can always see the thought that goes behind the policies. If not the policies that we can compare, we can at least see how the government looks at greening. They look at it very proactively. They look at the parks as not just recreational grounds, but something that is going to play a very large role in literally saving the country after 50 years from flooding, from increasing temperatures. So yeah, it's not only about biodiversity or recreational, which biodiversity should still be very important, but we have other way more crucial problems to face when we design in India or when we come up with policies in India. So it's certainly not easy. We have more complicated social layers and other things that we have to consider. So we can't really compare with Singapore. But we can always look into other countries maybe which are of similar size and try to learn from them as well. There are plenty of countries that have very good greening policies. So yeah, if nothing else, one thing we can even learn from China is some of their landscape projects. They're really working very closely on this Sponge City network, for example, the way they are looking at the wetlands and conserving and redesigning on a national scale. It's something we can learn from. But yeah, from Singapore, I would say the proactiveness of the government and even the community. When we reach out to the community, they're already very well aware of so many complex problems related to climate. So those two things, at least, is something we can certainly work on.
Thank you so much for joining us today, and it was really enlightening and eye-opening in several ways. Also, the insights were, I think, particularly useful, and maybe if everyone starts using even one of them, then over a period of time, we'll see some development here as well. So yes, thank you for joining us this evening, and thank you everyone. Stay safe, and meet you again soon.
Thank you for the invitation, Sandeep. Thank you.